So today we've got Mike Badger. Mike Badger is a speaker, podcaster, and leader within the Pastured Poultry community. He's done a wide array of different things during his career. And his Pastured Poultry experience kind of spans the whole spectrum, going from breeding, he's done marketing, he's done processing, so he's kind of done a little bit of everything there. And currently, his goal is really to support the community through his current role as the executive director of the American Pastured Poultry Producers Association. It's a fantastic organization. I don't remember when exactly I joined, but it has been quite the wealth of information. I've learned so much from other farmers through APPPA, and just love to get your take on APPPA and kind of how you got here, Mike, and just love to hear your story. So thanks for coming on.
Hey, thanks, Jeff, for having me. So there started about I don't know, maybe about not quite 15 years ago. So somewhere in that 13, 14 year range, I guess it was. My wife and I moved to our property. We have a small little property. It's 13 acres. It used to be an old mill. So a grist mill here in the area. And so the property was more of a homestead setup. And so we had a little chicken coop and a little pig barn and lots of woods and a creek that flows through the property. And so that was our first animal, was raising a couple of hogs, and found that was pretty cool. And then in my travels, I met a guy who did bees. My second animal was a couple colonies of bees. And then that bee club introduced me to some folks that were doing pastured poultry. There was a guy here in the area, Dave Owens, and he's still a member of APPPA. And there's another guy that isn't producing anymore, but they were talking about pasture raised poultry and visiting Joel's place and seeing what he does. And so I was intrigued by that. And so my next step then was broilers. This would have been probably around 2010. And so we got some broilers in place, raised them for ourselves, and then I joined APPPA at that time. And I thought, well, we could probably sell a few of these and pay for our meat. And so that's what we did. And my wife and I, we direct marketed about 1,000 broilers a year, just around our immediate area. We're in north central Pennsylvania, so it's very rural. And so you got to work really hard to sell a lot of chickens. And we were thinking about going to market, farmers markets. There's a couple small ones around the area. And so we went and we bought a processing. We built a mobile unit through Poultry Man. Well, we realized, and it took me a trip. I had started with APPPA right about that time, about 2011. So I went to the Southern SOG conference down in Chattanooga at the time, and there were some discussions about mobile processing units. And I realized the common mobile processing unit business plan was incredibly flawed. Like the idea was people would come rent it, use it, and haul it back to wherever they rented it from. I found that wasn't really what people wanted. People wanted you to do it. They didn't, they loved that you would come to their farm, and they loved that you would do it. And so that's what we did for mostly 6 years. That was our business. We did primarily broilers. We had at one time we had a small egg flock to supply a restaurant with some brunch eggs for their Sunday brunch. And we did a handful of turkeys here and there for Thanksgiving. And so we just kind of realized that at one point, I was actually picking up more steam with APPPA. So I started out doing the newsletter. A few years into that whole foray, I took over the director position. So all that stuff was coming to bear.
Going to other farms and processing like 5 days a week, or how that looked like?
Yeah, we'd easily run 5 days a week. Some days, sometimes 6.
Wow.
We had a couple places we would do 2 in a day.
And was it just your wife at the time, or did you have a crew of people, or how did that look?
So we built our unit to be operated by one person. So that varied over the years. Like the first couple of years, Christy, she had more than like 50 or 70 birds. Like we had to help her, but it didn't work really well in our area for where we were at. So we kind of put that aside. We continued to do some meat birds there for a few years after that, and really kind of transitioned into pullets. We raise a few hundred specialty pullets a year, like a couple hundred, 300-400 turkeys that we start and sell, and then we broker a lot of ready-to-lay pullets. So that's kind of our poultry business, and we have an online e-commerce business too that focuses on some supply stuff. So that's kind of where we settled in. But these days, a lot of my effort is definitely APPPA. It's at least a half-time thing. It's just myself and Kate, another person, kind of working the APPPA stuff. And so we do a conference there, we do newsletters, we do just the normal member management stuff. We do some events here and there throughout the year. So
yeah, that's cool. And I mean, you've kind of run that whole gamut, starting with broilers, starting it sounds like you kind of just doing it for yourselves, maybe just to provide your own food in the beginning. I think a lot of people can gravitate to that because they start just raising their own food, myself included. Like 20 chickens, just wanted to raise it for my family.
Yeah,
and then it just grows, and then you get bit by the bug, right? And so was it? I'm just curious. And now you're the director of APPPPA. So what was it that you were like, pastured poultry is the thing? Because you said you did some pigs, you said you did bees. What was it about poultry that really like resonated with you and was like, this is what I want to do and what I want to help people do?
That in a large part is APPPPA, because that organization existed to bring together pastured poultry people from across the country and even to some degree around the world. So when I stepped into APPPPA as a member, you plug into that, and you kind of realize that there's a lot of smart people running around that know a thing or two about poultry. And so it was really easy to kind of just sit and meet up and kind of associate yourself with those knowledgeable people, and just you develop a relationship with a couple different people, and you get a lot of knowledge, you get a lot of information, you got a lot of wisdom, and being a part of APPPPA, especially in my capacities, I get to see a lot. You gain experience by several different ways. One of them is actually doing it and doing something in a variety of circumstances, but you also get a lot of experience in being around other people who are doing a variety of things. And so, you might see a couple thousand birds on your own farm in one context, but I had the option to see, 100 farms doing, tens of thousands of birds, for example. Especially when we were processing, we would be on farm, and so we would see all of these circumstances. And so, and just kind of applying kind of what I learned and what I knew versus what they were doing and what they were seeing, and be able to synthesize that experience, and that's really come in handy. The community is one thing that kind of drew it. There wasn't anything out there for pigs, really, is kind of my point. And when it comes to chickens, the promise of poultry is really, really awesome. A family can feed themselves so well with just egg layers, right? I mean, the simple egg is just dynamite for taking care of your family. They're relatively easy. You get eggs every week. You can eat them, and it's just great. So I think that's, and when you go to meat birds, of course, you can flip a meat bird in a few weeks, depending on what you're raising. 7-8 weeks or maybe a little longer. But the turnaround time there, just to put really high quality protein on your plate, and it's really good for your soil. And so there's just all that stuff that we talk about in pastured poultry. It was all just kind of appealing. Like, you can really take control of your food with poultry, and it's real tangible. You can see it because it happens fast.
You mentioned about broilers taking 7 to 8 weeks. I talked to a lot of farmers, and I tell them the same thing. A lot of farmers, I think, are thinking about what enterprises to do on their farm, and is it poultry, is it pigs, is it cattle? But the one thing I think that really stands out and kind of sets poultry above the rest is that quick turnaround. right? Because if you think about doing grass-fed beef, it's a year and a half to get your first harvest. And so it takes you a year and a half till you have your first, real moment of truth, right? And you learn anything about that process, like, oh, what should I change? What should I do different? Whereas poultry, 7 weeks. I mean, you can do, you can do, six, like that's like 9 or 10 cycles, potentially.
Yeah.
And so you're basically increasing your learning curve, your practice, and the number of batches you've done by a factor of 10, practically in that same time frame. And so I think I always say like poultry is kind of like the gateway drug to farming, right? It's easy. It's easy to get into. A lot of people start there, and you get a lot of experience in doing it.
Yeah, it's easy. It's easy. That's the good part of it. There's almost no barrier to entry to go from having a few birds to even try to sell, a couple hundred a year. Like there's just no barrier to entry to that, which is awesome. So lots of people try it, and sometimes people realize it's not for them, and that's okay too. Or they just realize they want to stick to their family, and that's cool. But yeah, so that's one of the nice parts is that low barrier to entry.
100%. And I say it's easy. It's easy to start. And a lot of people have experience raising a few layers in the backyard, maybe even a few broilers. But to do it at scale and be successful, I think takes definitely a lot more experience and nuance to it. So you mentioned that during your career you've learned a lot from other farmers. You've observed a lot. Are there any particular scenarios, any particular events that really kind of stand out to you that you're like, wow, that's an aha moment, like as as far as production or just something you've seen that you're like, wow, that's amazing, that just really struck a nerve that you thought was something that you carried with you maybe in your own experience?
I don't know if this was really an aha kind of thing, but I've come to the realization that I obviously interact with a lot of independent pastured farmers, but I also interact with a few conventional poultry farmers. The level of knowledge is different. If you're a conventional grower and you have a contract, your responsibility is to basically check on the birds and keep them alive. But if you have problems, you're going to make a phone call to your tech, and you're going to find out what they want you to do from there. I'm not saying they don't have any knowledge or they don't know anything. They definitely do, but their range of what they know and why things happen it doesn't compare to, like, say, somebody who's been raising pastured poultry for 10 years. Like if you've been producing 20,000 pastured poultry broilers for 10 years, or your 15 years, you have to know so much to be a pastured poultry producer. You have to know, whether you like it or not, you have to know the animal husbandry, you have to know the animal nutrition, you have to know the processing, you have to know the marketing, you have to know all of those bits and pieces. And so what you have to really be good at covers a lot of ground. You have to have broad and deep knowledge in several subjects, and that's what I really like about our space. Is you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you have to have that deep pool of knowledge across several different things to really make it click. And I think that's really different from like the conventional counterparts who are raising on contract. That's a realization that's kind of come to me here in the past, over the years, and I guess that's played out, in different conversations with folks. I talk to a lot of people who are having problems. People have it, they call, they want an answer to it, or they want help with it. And there's just sometimes when you identify the problem and, you don't necessarily have to offer the right solution, but you identify a problem and you have to do something different, right? You tell somebody they have to do something different because what they're doing is not working, and it's met with resistance, and those are the people who ride their the way they do things right out right out of business, right? If you don't change, then you're gonna at best stand still and not progress, but at worst you're gonna go out of business. And so, there's a willingness. You have to have a willingness to kind of say, stand in front of the mirror and say, okay, what am I doing here? Is it working? What can I control, and what can I change to make it better? And I think if you don't have that, I'm not saying you can't make it work, but it's a lot harder.
I can relate to that quite a bit because, I talk to a lot of farmers, and a lot of people. I feel like a lot of people are aware of their problem, right? They kind of know what needs to be done in the back of their head, but they either don't know how to fix it, or like you said, they're kind of just stuck, and they just think that they're going to figure it out. And really, there's only two ways that you learn in life. Is one is trial and error, right? Through your own experimentation, and sometimes you fall. A lot of times, like myself, fall flat on my face, and sometimes you figure something out. But that costs a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, right? And the other way is to learn from others, right? And I think that's one thing that's fantastic about APPPA, because there's such a wealth of information. That's probably the biggest thing that I've gotten from it, is there's such a diverse array of farmers. Anybody from just started raising their first handful of backyard chickens to you've got farmers that are doing, there's a couple guys that are doing a couple million eggs a year, and it's just crazy. So maybe tell me, what do you see as some of the arching benefits of, somebody's listening to this, let's say they're not a APPPA member. What would you say to them? What would you say are kind of the overarching benefits of an organization like this?
So APPPA, American Pastured Poultry Producers Association, there's a few different levels to it. Kind of a high level, there's over 25 years of organizational knowledge kind of wrapped up in APPPA in some fashion. There's definitely oral history, there's oral knowledge, but we have a significant archive of data and information, whether it's some of the online stuff that we've done recently, whether, to our printed newsletter, to our archive discussions, there's a significant wealth of knowledge that spans, back to the late 90s. And I think that's really cool. One of the central ethos in APPPA is transparency, right? Some folks on the board like to say that, we like to trade secrets. We're not about trade secrets. It's that idea. There's a transparency. Not people don't give away every strategic advantage they might have in their farm, but when you go to like an APPPA conference and you're running around talking with people, and you have a question, you just ask them, right? And they'll help you. And help you try to see where you're at and what you're doing, and try to give you some guidance along the way. And I think that happens, at the conference in person in real time. It happens through something like our monthly Ask APPPA calls, which is just an hour we do with just Q&A, or ongoing with our discussions and stuff. And so, that's what we do. It's connecting our members who are raising, pastured poultry as part of a viable business, and kind of helping them connect in the community of other producers, consumers, and processors, and just kind of making that whole ecosystem work. And you don't really know what you're missing, and it's hard to kind of convince somebody sometimes to know what they're missing, because we're not free, we're not expensive, but we're not free. All the good stuff usually is hidden behind that paywall. But my philosophy is, if you pay $60 a year for your membership, and you don't get enough value out of that first year to pay for a lifetime of APPPA memberships, then either you didn't try or you're perfect.
There's probably a few people that are in farming. I don't think that's possible. That's cool. And so, what what's one thing that you think, I know you talk to a lot of farmers, you do these monthly calls. What do you think is kind of maybe one of the biggest things that you see farmers struggling with that you hear about on these phone calls and all the time?
One of the challenges, I guess, it kind of boils down to this idea that, you may be a farmer, but really you have a marketing business. And so, and I borrowed this advice off of Paul Gree from a number of years ago from our conference. The idea that as soon as you know you're going to raise chickens or sell poultry, you need to start marketing. Whether or not you're going to have your first batch in 6 weeks or 6 months or a year, you need to be marketing the fact that you're going to have it. And so that when you do have it, you have a pool of people who already are comfortable and know you and you can sell to. And so that idea that, like it or not, very few options exist right now in the pastured poultry industry to be simply a grower. There's some of those out there for sure. There's some of those out there, but the vast majority of the opportunity is, farmer to consumer. And whether that's a chef or whether that's somebody at the farmer's market or mail order, whatever the case is, it's that direct marketing business. And so I think that's the number one challenge. Everything else can be learned, right? I mean, if you have production problems and you're having problems in the brooder, which is always the second most common problem you see, you can fix that. That's just technical. That's just a little bit of attention to detail, maybe changing your mindset, whatever the case may be. But you can fix that. If you don't market, it doesn't matter if your brooder's good, because you're not going to move product, and you're eventually going to build up a surplus anyway, and you won't last.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think a lot of problems often stem from a lack of marketing too. Right. I mean, people, a lot of people will say, well, I've hit a limit in my production, right? We filled up all our freezers. We can't produce any more birds. And we don't have the money to get a walk-in freezer. We're not ready to take that next step, whatever it is. And it's like, well, I tend to think, well, if you had the customer base that was willing and ready to buy your product, and you had the sales coming in, and that was a sure thing, you wouldn't have that hesitation to go ahead and invest in that walk-in freezer, So I feel like marketing sales really, to an extent, that they fix a lot of those other problems in some ways. So with that being said, if people are struggling with marketing, you think, and I agree, that's the biggest thing that kind of separates the wheat from the chaff. Because you have to be marketing. You have to be a farmer. You have to wear all these hats. You have to be able to fix things. You have to be able to problem solve. You have to be able to sell your product. So many things you got to do. What would you say are some of the things you've taken away? Maybe some advice you would have for farmers that are maybe struggling a little bit on the marketing side.
It kind of comes back to the thing that makes our APPPA community run. And that's the idea of community. It's also about how you interact with that community and what you had to give that community, as much as what it is about what you take out of it. And so it's the same way with your customers. It's you've got to be establishing that relationship, establishing that trust, so that yes, you're making a transaction, you're selling them eggs or turkey or chicken or whatever the case may be. But there's got to be something there's got to be something more there, right? That customers got to feel connected to you, because if the minute you start selling chicken, you're gonna have to find a lot of customers, because everybody sells chicken. So you got to find the people that connect to you, that meet your values, and you meet theirs, and you have that ongoing kind of relationship with folks. And so that it's in one word, it's relationship.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to marketing, like you said, once you start a farm, and I think this is where pasture poultry or farmers in general kind of excel, right? Is because once you start a farm, you have customers and you have to start asking those customers to buy, right? But if you ask them to buy every time you send an email or every time you communicate with them, it's really going to kind of hurt your standing, right? It's going to hurt that trust level. They're going to know that every time you send an email, you're asking them to buy some chicken. And so I think, I agree. I think it's about having that balance, having that relationship of where, you take one time, but you have to give far more than you take. You have to give 3, 4, 5 times, put some value in your email and then you ask, right? And I think it's the same thing with APPPA, with interactions with the people in the group too. Everybody is so much more willing to give. And that's what really makes the community work.
Yeah, it's I just was remembering a conversation on our listserv. It might have been 2 years ago now, but sometime in the recent past. The idea was sourcing chicks and kind of going through the process of finding the lowest cost chick for that year, with the implication being, if you can save, a quarter across 5,000 or 15,000 chicks or whatever the number is, 20,000, or that's a fairly significant amount of money. But the problem with that approach is you're selling that short-term gain for that long-term relationship, because you're going to be hopping suppliers, and so if there's really no incentive for a hatchery in this context to work with you, if you're coming by once every 4 years, can you get the best price, or you're here to this year and going next year, where's the incentive for that hatchery to work with you when something happens? Who do they take care of? They take care of their loyal customers that have been with them first, right? They're the people who rise to the top, and so we fall as producers, as consumers, we fall victim to that sometime in shopping with our, and shopping on something other than that relationship piece of it. And then when we run into problems, then kind of sometimes we're on our own. We don't have that support resource, or that 20 years or 10 years of history with that supplier to draw on.
Yeah, I guess you could say that the same thing would apply to more than just the hatchery, right? You've got the processor, you've got the feed delivery. So I think that's really important. That's a good point. What is the one thing, Mike, that for you get really excited about, that really makes you like, oh man, today was a good day, like this is awesome. Like I feel like I really made a difference today, either with the farm or with the group. What is it that you really like, really get you pumped up?
Oh my goodness. Fishing. That gets me motivated. No, like I said, I do a lot of troubleshooting and just kind of problem solving. And so one of the things that I really, really like is the opportunity to troubleshoot. And so it's really cool when you can walk through a process, and lead somebody through a series of questions, and you come down to kind of, well, here's our short list, and being able to share that the knowledge that I have accumulated so far and the knowledge I'll get tomorrow with somebody who calls me and say, well, this is likely your problem, right? This is what we've seen, this is what we've come to, and so that helping people discover where they can improve or fix a problem. I mean, that's really been, whether I've been doing chickens or tech support or other stuff, I mean, that's really kind of what's defined what I've done for most of my working life is that troubleshooting, problem solving kind of thing.
What do you see as the plans for the future, for the organization, for yourself? What goals, dreams, accomplishments you'd like to see happen?
Right now for APPPA, the discussion is, how do we have more impact in pastured poultry with our members, and so we're looking at actively looking at those ways so that other people know us and find us and know that we're relevant. And so we're looking at membership structures and offerings right now, and looking at ways we can make the conference that we do, appeal to our type of grower, which really is, when you boil it down, APPPA is about producing pastured poultry for sale. Now we plug in at various scales, from the homestead scale up until to some larger, 6-figure type producers a year, meat birds anyway. And so there's a whole big scale, which creates its own complications and make with people. Like, is APPPA for me? Like, you hear it depending on the day, you either hear APPPA's for big people or you hear APPPA's for little people. When you just look at the history, you can see that APPPA has a track record of kind of approaching all the scales. So that's, from professionally with APPPA, that's kind of where we're at. We're kind of getting ready to grow aggressively, do some membership pushes. Like I said, we brought Kate Bowen in as our communications person, and she's really ramped up our social media presence and has been taking charge of some behind the scenes committee stuff, and just kind of helping us be more organized and on the right path, which is much appreciated. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going. Personally, I don't know where the next few years leads me. Like I said, we're developing. Christy and I have developed a really, I think, significant ready-to-lay pullet business, and we have an e-commerce business, but that's related. So I think those things are ripe right now for expansion, and there's a lot of interesting things coming down the pike in terms of market demand for ready-to-lay pullets in particular. There's a starting to be an upswelling or groundswell of demand for like vaccination-free pullets, which is incredibly hard to find unless you're raising them yourself. And so I'm not sure what that means, but there's not really many people out there thinking about it or trying to do it, because the traditional pullet growers right now would never do a vaccination-free pullet. They don't believe in it. They think it's going to result in instantaneous death. And so what's that opportunity? So we're exploring some personally in our business.
And what breeds are you raising?
So for that stuff, we would be probably either a Highline or a Novagen, and I'd work with a trusted grower to be involved. To do that, I'd be pretty hands-on. The other, and I've raised vaccination-free pullets. That's the only kind I raise personally, but when I do it, we're talking about a couple batches of a few hundred at a time. I was doing colored egg layers like Americanas or Whiting True Blues. I kept a couple of those for a few years and did some hatching, bred them and did some hatching and stuff, and that was kind of fun. But so that's more for the backyard market, the people who just want like a couple dozen blue eggs in their egg cartons for a market or something like that. But the size of those markets compared to like when I can sell. I just took an order today for 1,000 pullets in October. I struggle to get orders for 50 like of the Americanas.
This is one thing I've always been curious about. Maybe you can, and I'm sure you probably don't have the exact figures, but if you can kind of give me an overview of how many people are in APPPA and where do you think they fall in that spectrum? You said, you got major producers that are doing this full-time job at big companies versus people that are serious about farming, but maybe it's not a full-time job. versus other people that are, kind of that homesteader type level. Do you have an idea of how many members and where they fall in those categories?
Well, we just did we just did a survey last fall. I think our median meat bird flock is somewhere around 6,500 birds annually. So that creates our first, and it might be off there at the top of my head by 1,000 or two, but it doesn't really matter. It's in that neighborhood, right? So that's our first line, is half of the people are raising less than 10,000 birds a year. As you go along, you'll discover that, there's very few people doing, like, say 50,000 or less. That represents probably, it might be closer to 10% of the market these days, but it's somewhere probably 5 to 10% of our group would be like 50,000 plus. Like that's pretty significant. And so a bulk of our folks, no matter what you want to call them, whether you want to call them homesteaders or people who are just starting out trying to run a business, or are typically always going to start small, and that looks different for different people. It might be a couple hundred first year, it might be 50 layers to see what's going on. That's where the bulk of our people come in that 0 to 3 year range of experience, and then it really starts dropping off in experience wise after that. If you can make it to 5 years, you're not out of the woods, but you're on your way. Like you've cleared some hurdles, and hopefully you're making some money at that, and you're not just ultra stubborn, right? Hopefully there's some success. But if you make it to 10 years, pretty much, it's still not guaranteed, but you're cruising pretty well. But there's a lot of drop off there between that 3 year and 10 year mark. I think we turn over probably 50% of our people inside of those first 3 years. And, for a variety of reasons, markets, some of them, processing some of it. Some people just realize that it's not for them. They read a book one time and they were inspired, so they started to raise chickens. And then they said, well, I don't want to do this anymore. It's hard. And so there's a lot of reasons in there in that first three years. And APPPA has right now, we're doing membership by farms, which is probably one of the things that will change here when we do our membership. But we have just slightly less than 1,100 member farms throughout the U.S. A couple in Canada, there are a couple in Europe and Australia and stuff. So a couple non-U.S. ones, but for the most part, we're U.S. based, and it hasn't quite tripled since I've been with APPPA. But when I first came in 2011. I guess it was. I was doing the newsletter. That was my responsibility. So we had like 460 members at that time. So, and we've had some different periods of growth. Like we had a COVID spurt when everybody kind of was home and decided they wanted chickens, and that drove a big demand spike into APPPA, but it didn't last. A lot like our members' customers. They had that same spike in their business, and a lot of that demand didn't stick. So we spiked, and then we fell back down, and we had a couple other points throughout the years where we spiked and kind of had some attrition back down. It's been a slow steady climb, which is not a bad thing, but we're looking to grow some more.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen like a lot of things evolve and change, since you've been with the organization over the last, 13, 14 years or so. What do you see that's gone really well? And maybe something that hasn't gone well, maybe behind the scenes for those of us that are just members, I'm just curious, what's gone really well, what hasn't gone well?
Going well, like one of the things that has gone really well in the community is just the level of innovation that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, let's say. And you can look at egg shelters, pastured egg shelters as an example. Egg shelters on the market, but to kind of integrate the idea of some commercial poultry aspects, like, maybe roll out nest boxes with conveyors or augered feed or those kind of things, solar powered, to run it all in pasture, and really kind of bring some comfort for the birds and for the farmer to carry out and make it possible to do all the basics right and still maintain that pasture model, which is all about rotation through a fresh pasture. And so and you see meat bird, shelter innovation happening, where the mobile range coop idea, the big old schooners, 20 by 40 ish, give or take a few feet here and there, kind of moving 400, 500, 600 bird batches. If you look at Pasture Bird, aka Purdue, they're doing automation. They have autonomous coops. They move them sideways, 6,000 bird batches. Their pasture model mimics, they're doing movement, and they're doing it in automation, and that automation idea is trickling down into, it's been, that's one of the things I'm really surprised about is the automation in the coops. When I can remember when I first started, there was some people back then, like in 2013 or so, talking about automated coops, and I'm like, whatever, man, like, no way. But they're here. There's independent companies who are actively working on automation, and the problem is it's real costly still. It's expensive. But there's companies doing it, and there's farmers doing it, and so I think that's a real exciting spot here in the next couple of years, is to see what innovation comes out of that. And it doesn't have to necessarily be that your coop moves by itself, but I can tell you, if you're running a big range coop kind of thing, to move that, you have to impact your pastures every day with a truck or a tractor or some kind of equipment to get that thing moved, and it takes extra people. And so if you can eliminate some of that stuff, there's some definitely benefits to automation, and of course, and definitely automation in the feed and water supply and in the coops themselves. And so that's been one of the really exciting things to see come to market. And I think that's had an impact on what we see possible from a grower standpoint. When I came in, if you were raising 10,000 birds a year, like, you were 20,000 birds a year, you were tops. That was significant. There was only a couple people pushing large numbers, pushing that 100,000 mark. But now that's not the case. It's more common for people to be running 20, 30,000, 50,000, and lots of people are kind of over that six-figure mark annually for broilers. So I like to see that innovation. We've struggled as an organization, kind of figuring out how to do local events as a national group on a limited resource. Getting out into the countryside, if you will, to do local events is challenging sometimes, but we've tried it a couple times with some success. We're currently doing it now. I think that's going to be. I think we're set up now to actually execute kind of a regional meeting model. So we're testing some stuff out here in 24 and 25. We'll have a more robust opportunity for people for members to host, and so we'll have that kind of competitive process to select events for 2025 that we can market and partner with some of our member farms to pull that off. And so that's been a long time coming. It seems easy to pull off, but it as somebody who's coordinated a fair number of those over the years, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do from a national perspective when you're trying to work locally. So we think we got it. We'll see what happens in 25.
That's great. You touched on, Purdue is now doing this pastured movement, and I know it's been a little bit of a hot topic among the pasture poultry community. I know you spoke to it at length, but Without going too far into detail, but when you see some of these bigger players like Purdue kind of adopting this pastured poultry model, particularly for broilers, do you see that? What do you think that means to the small producer? Do you see that as a threat, or do you, for the future of the small pastured poultry farmer, you see it as a threat to them? Do you see it as it doesn't make any difference? Do you think it's a good thing, or do you think it's maybe just going to push innovation even further?
Probably a little bit of all of that stuff. I think should you be concerned? I think it's something you watch for sure. I've thought for a while that pastured poultry will ultimately become a business of one end or the other. You're either smaller in niche or you're larger in commodity, even in a pastured model, right? I mean, and in the middle of that is no man's land. And so we don't know where no man's land is. One of my last episodes that I published on Pastured Poultry Talk was with Greg Gunthorpe, talking about this very idea. He doesn't do birds anymore, chickens anymore, because he was in that no man's land. He felt his wholesaled to chefs, wholesale to restaurants, kind of got kicked in the teeth in COVID and really hurt his business. And he was running them all through his own USDA processing plant. And he was doing a lot of birds comparatively to many people in the community, but it wasn't enough to make it all work in the way that it should have worked. And so he felt he was in no man's land. And so I think that's what we see happening in pastured poultry. And I don't know what those numbers are. Greg would tell you he thinks it's 20,000 was the number we talked about on the show. And 20,000 being that's the number of birds you can do under PL 40 492 or 90 to 492, the processing exemptions, on farm producer grower exemptions. So I think there's something to be said about that. I agree with him in that respect. So,
I think, I don't know, personally, I feel like it's inevitable that people are going to catch on, right? The big guys are going to catch on as they start losing market share, and they're going to start adopting that, which, in a way is a good thing, right? It's good for everybody who's producing better food. And I don't think the small grower will disappear. I think there'll always be innovation and find something new to make it even better and stand out,
Yeah. I think there's always room for somebody who can create that relationship with their customers and deliver a product that consumer trusts. Like it or not, there's just a group of people who are not going to trust Purdue no matter what they do. And look, their pasture bird model is a pastured model. When they were independent, they were using mobile range coops and moving them every day, and they're still moving them every day on pasture. I think it is true that eventually, the conventional industry, the commercial market, if you will, they're about making money. That's what they want to do. Whatever they tell you about feeding the world, their bottom line motivation is making money. And so if they can do that, they're going to. The danger, and there's in this regard, Purdue's the exception. And it's a good exception. But the danger in our business is, especially with eggs, but it happens with meat birds here recently as well, is all like smaller regional companies kind of pretending to be pastured or marketing a pastured ideal while really not doing anything other than what a commercial industry might do. They might change up some barn style. They might actually open their doors every once in a while, but they're not on pasture. They're not movement-based pasture for sure, right? You see this kind of idea slip away and erode what pastured poultry means when you start looking at some of these companies, and pasture becomes a number of square foot of access. Well, that's not what APPPA thinks pasture is. APPPA thinks pasture is, you have birds on pasture, living on pasture, actually in the grass, in the sunlight, and it's vegetative, right? And they're moved. There's a movement component, and so the birds aren't sitting stationary, and they're not continuously grazing one section of a paddock for their life. They may be raised in a brooder inside for the first couple of weeks. That's normal. But so that's the pastured model, and so we have companies who come in and capitalize on the idea, the buzz that we've created and our customers have created, the demand for pasture raised. And so it's easy to come in as a bigger player and say, oh yeah, we do pasture too, and market the idea, but don't do anything like our members do it in APPPA. And what you end up with is, this idea where these companies can produce it cheaper because they're going to scale it easier, and they're going to sell, quote unquote, the same product at a fraction of our price to an unsuspecting consumer who's not savvy enough to understand they're getting hoodwinked, because they're not buying the same thing. Because at the heart of everybody who raises pastured poultry like we do in APPPA, there's a fundamental belief that it's different. And if you don't believe that it's different, you'll never be able to get the prices you need for your business to stay around. If you're just chasing the money, that's going to be a short-term kind of gig. So yeah, it's a challenge. And that's been a pressure for years now.
And it's not just a belief that pastured poultry is different. Like, I think one of the nice things that I love is that you've got, when you're an APPPA member, you have some studies that have been done on pasture-raised chicken meat, eggs, and it shows the nutritional differences. It shows, you can see that the omega-3s and the vitamins are off the charts. And I've actually used that quite a bit in some of my marketing on my farm. People are like, oh wow, it's not only does it taste different, but it is different. You can really tell. Movement, exercise, sunlight, fresh air, and their diet makes a big difference. So what would you say to some folks, like, somebody that's listening and maybe they're a homesteader, or maybe they've been doing some broilers. They've been doing a couple thousand broilers a year. And they're really looking, hey, maybe I want to become a pasture poultry producer. Maybe I want to really take a big swing at this whole farming thing. What advice would you say to them?
The first advice I would have is try it. Grab a few birds, raise them for yourself, for your family, and just start slow and see if you like it. See if you actually like raising chickens, right? You have to kind of, that's the first step. If you try to build a lot of this business without liking chickens, it's probably not going to work all that well. So you have to figure out if you want to do it. And then, my recommendation is always grow slow. Just kind of grow organically, and so that if an opportunity comes your way, you're ready to kind of capitalize on it, and you can make a decision whether you want to invest in some bigger infrastructure or not. So
yeah, don't build an MRC right out of the gate, right?
Right.
All right, cool. And lastly, how do people join APPPA? What are the benefits they get? Where do they find you? Tell me a little about that.
So we just go to apppa.org. That's APPPA.org. There's a menu at the top that says join. You'll click on that. You'll get a list of kind of what we offer right now. And what we offer right now is a bi-monthly trade magazine. So it's the APPPA Grit. It's published every other month, so bi-monthly. Has been for the last, we've been publishing since '97. So, and we have a fair number of those archived in our website for members. So I think we go back 7 years right now for the archive. So lots of resources. That's just like any other magazine, sometimes it's just kind of general interest stuff. It's very specific. Sometimes it's just stuff to have on record, new thoughts, ideas, innovations, profiles. It runs the gamut. But then we also do this. We have our online community part of it. We have a discussion group that all members are added to, and that's where our members share their resources kind of in real time and ask questions. And what what it doesn't have in quantity that you might get in a popular Facebook group, it has in quality, because the people who are reading and responding are a lot of times just like you. They're actually they're working and doing it and making their businesses run. And so there's a good discussion. It's a deep discussion sometimes. And then we of course do Ask APPPA, which is our call-in help show every month. We manage a website called Get Real Chicken. It's a producer directory of our members. So we have a couple of videos out there. You can view them on getrealchicken.com. You can view the videos, but they kind of set the stage for what makes pastured poultry and different from the alternatives. And they direct people back to that webpage to search for people. And so, I know people use it. It's a heavily visited site. Our members get leads from it, but like any other thing in marketing, it is what you make of it. So the effort you put in, but we have stuff that are efforts to drive traffic to that site. It's mostly long tail kind of SEO stuff now, but it's a steady stream. And we do an annual conference, which is available for members and non-members. Our members typically get a price break. 3 days, 2025, and we'll be in Dallas, Texas again for probably our last year in Dallas before we go someplace different. But yeah, that's the kind of the overview of what you get.
That's awesome. And if people were interested in getting some ready-to-lay pullets, where would they find you, Mike?
So my ready-to-lay pullets, you can just go to readytolaypullets.com. And that'll get you where you need to go.
Okay, great. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to do this. It's been great. It's been fun. And I appreciate all your insights and your knowledge and contributing to that. So thank you so much, man.
Awesome, Jeff. Thanks for having me on. And looks like we'll wrap up right before my battery dies. That's pretty cool.
All right, good timing.
Cool,
all right.
man.
Have a good one.
Hey, thanks. You too.
Thanks.